Welcome, everybody, to Victory Circle Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wilson. Today we have Oak McCulloch. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Army, and he spends his retirement as an author and a speaker. Welcome to the show, Oak.
Well, thanks, Jason. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. So everybody has their own unique story about how they become the people that they are in business, in sports, or in your case, in the military. Was it your dream to be a United States colonel?
So, it's funny because I get asked that all the time. What made me do it? Because my family isn't a military family. I did have a couple uncles who during Vietnam I had one Army NCO that was in during the Vietnam and one Navy. He was in the Navy during Vietnam. But other than that, nobody in my family really was in the military. And it was about sophomore year in high school when I finally decided that's what I wanted to do. When, I played baseball, basketball, football in high school. I was captain of my team and president of student government in this class and all that. So I had some leadership positions, and I kind of figured out that I not only am I okay at it, but I really enjoyed being the leader because I could help people.
Right.
And that's really, for me, that's what leadership is about. And so that's when I really decided I wanted to be an Army officer, and really started pursuing. I pursued an ROTC scholarship, pursued West Point. And so it took me that way. And so that's really when I decided, was probably sophomore year in high school.
Okay. So how was your experience at West Point? Did you enjoy it?
So I did not graduate from West Point. I was only there for 2 years. But yeah, does anybody enjoy West Point? I'm not sure that's anybody does, especially not your first year. But it was an experience, and it certainly was an experience that helped shape me and make me not only the person I am, but the officer that I was. It instilled some things in me that I think that I still carry today. The duty, honor, country type thing, theme that West Point has, and the ethics. The no. I will not lie, cheat, or steal. So the honor code kind of stuff all kind of stuck with me throughout my career and throughout my life. And I really push all that in my presentation. And I think you get some of it in my books, in my book as well.
Okay. And then how was your experience in the Army?
Yeah, I tell people, look, I spent 23 years on active duty, wouldn't trade any of it for anything. Does that mean I loved every day? No, I'm sure there were days when I was wondering if I really did make the right decision. That's not true. I always knew I made the right decision. But there were certainly days where, you're sitting out in the desert. I was out at the National Training Center for a couple of years. I'd been deployed to the desert a few times. And you're, 120-degree weather, and you're kind of like saying, yeah, is this really the smart thing to do? But in the end, it really was beneficial to me. I loved being an officer in the Army. My kids got to grow up and do some things that they would never have gotten to do. And I always tell people two funny stories. Me, my wife, and my two children, I have a son and a daughter, we've all been to Paris, France, and none of us were there together. So my wife went during college. I went when I was temporary duty to Europe without my family for 6 months. I went to Paris for a weekend. And then my son and daughter, when we were stationed in Germany, all of us, their 5th grade field trip was to Paris.
Wow.
So all of us have been to Paris. None of us were there together. So the other story I always tell is, my kids got to do some really amazing things. And my daughter said she never really appreciated all the things she got to do until she was in college, and she was taking an art appreciation class. And, it's one of those classes where there's 500 people in an auditorium, and there's one slide up there. And she said the instructor threw up a picture of the Mona Lisa. And she said, how many people have actually seen the actual painting of Mona Lisa? And my daughter said 3 people raised their hand. Her, the daughter of an Air Force officer, and the daughter of a Navy officer.
Wow.
Only 3 people had seen it. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So did you have any war experience?
Yeah, so I was in the first Gulf War, 1990, and I was in the 24th Infantry Division as an infantry officer during that war. And then I was, I wouldn't call it war, but it was a deployment, and it was during, a hostile type environment. I was the congressional liaison officer for General Clark during the Bosnia in Bosnia during the 1997, I think it was.
Wow.
And then 99 to 2000, for 9 months, I was in Kosovo as the operations officer, ran the day-to-day operations of an armor battalion, doing peacekeeping operations there.
Okay. Did you run into any hostile fire in any of those situations?
Just in the first Gulf War, a little bit, not too much, but a little bit.
Okay. Okay. But you were never injured or anything.
No, thank goodness I was never got hit by anything. I was in a helicopter crash during the first Gulf War and
Oh,
got hurt a little bit, but nothing that didn't keep me from staying there and doing what I had to do.
okay. Thank God.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Oak, what inspired you to write your book?
Yeah, so we got to kind of go back to my last assignment on active duty. I was a professor of military science, so I was running an Army ROTC program, producing the next generation of second lieutenants that for the Army. Now I do recruiting for an Army ROTC program, kind of doing helping to do the same thing. But
Hmm.
I was running that program in Mobile, Alabama, and I was going around talking to high school students because I had to do some of my own recruiting. And as I was going around talking to them, I'd always ask them, "So, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? What profession?" And I'd always, I did all kinds of professions, and but almost always, I'd get somebody to say, "Well, I want to be a leader." And I said, "Great, the world needs more leaders. What does that mean? What does it look like? What does it take?" And you get that deer in the headlights look. They had no idea what it took to be a leader. They just thought knew they wanted to be one, and probably for the wrong reasons. They
Hmm.
probably wanted to be one at that point in their life because they wanted a nice title, they wanted more pay, they wanted more privileges. And okay, leaders generally get those kinds of things, and that's okay. But
Right.
if that's the reason you want to be the leader, then you need to go do something else because you're never going to be a good leader.
Hmm.
And so I came up with this presentation that I gave, and I still give, and that's part of my speaking engagements on what it takes to be a good leader. And so I've been given that since 2006. And so I was and I always wanted to write a book. I just never really sat down and said, okay, I'm going to do it. So my wife and I and her mom and a couple of people who live in the condo that we live in, we went to a inspirational, motivational type of presentation at our Catholic church. And it was kind of a mix between motivation and how do we make the Catholic Church better. And
Hmm.
and a guy, great speaker, Jonathan Fanning. If you ever get a chance to listen to him, I would encourage you to listen to him. He's a great speaker. He
Okay.
was the presenter, and he, it was about a 3 hour long day. Now he wasn't presenting all that time. They had music and breaks and everything. And but I'd always go up there and I'd talk to him during the break. And during one of the breaks, we were talking, and he'd written a couple books. And I said, and I'm thinking about writing a book as well. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, stop thinking about it and write it." And I said, "You know what? You're right." So I went home that night. That was February 15th, 2020. I went home that night, wrote out my table of contents. Next day, I started writing it, and I published the book on the 12th of February, 2021. So just
Okay.
short of a year from the day I started writing it to the day it got published. And the audio version of the book just came out this weekend. So now I've got audio, ebook, paperback, and hardcover out.
Wow. Okay. So you started this right before the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely, right before it, and it kind of worked out well, because I was a lot of it working at home because I had to, didn't have a choice. And so I just spent some time also doing that. So yeah, it was really was satisfying writing the book. And I think I got one more in me. I give another presentation that I've been given just about as long as the other one on secrets to success. And I'm going to I want to write my second book on that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So your first book is Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be.
Right.
So give us just an overview of that book.
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in servant leadership. So it's really throughout the book, it talks about what you can do to better the people who work for you and the organization that you have the privilege, and it is a privilege to lead. Um, and so we talk about a bunch of different things. We talk about what selfless service is. What does it mean for a leader to be a servant leader? And then we talk about things, just everyday things. There is no theory in my book, none whatsoever. It is everyday things that everyday leaders can do to improve their leadership skills. And so we talk about communication in all forms. We talk about written communication, nonverbal, verbal. And when we talk about written communication, we talk about letters, texts, emails, all those kinds of things. We talk about listening, because listening is one of the most important parts of communication that we sometimes forget about, especially here in America.
Yeah.
Everybody's worried about the next thing they want to talk about, so they're not even thinking about what you're listening. They're not listening to what you're talking about. And then we talk about how to run a meeting. We talk about how to build teams, how to build a culture, vision, and a plan on how to get you from where you are today to where you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Talk about counseling, how to develop people, not only leaders, but people. Talk about professional development. We talk about getting results, all kinds of things that everyday leaders can do to improve their leadership skills. And I've had people who have read the book, and I have had people who've heard the presentation who tell me that they think that, it's spot on, that it talks about those things and it's things that they can do. And I also get asked all the time, who did I write the book for? And I'll be honest, when I first sat down and started writing, I thought, well, I'm going to write this for young aspiring leaders, people who just took over as a leader, or are high school or college students who want to be leaders. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. But I also get people like me, been a leader, old people like me who've been a leader for 30, 40 years, who say to me, I picked up your book, I read it, Oak, and I didn't learn a whole lot of new things. They say I may have picked up a couple of new techniques on how to do things, but they say what they really took out of it was this. They'd be reading along and they'd say, you know what? I used to do that really well, and I don't do that so well anymore. Maybe I need to dedicate some time to get back to doing that again.
Yeah.
And we all go through that. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been a leader. We all forget about some things that we probably should continue to do, or we veer off and we don't do things the way we used to do them, and we probably need to get back to it. And I find myself doing that as well. I've been a leader for 40 plus years. I still pick up leadership books and read them and learn something. And if I always tell people, look, if you think that you can't learn anything else about leadership, go do something else.
Right.
Because at that point, you're not helping anybody, because we can all learn something every day. Leadership is a journey. It is not a destination. You don't get there and all of a sudden there's nothing else you can learn or nothing you can do better. Every day is something new, and you can learn something every day.
Yes. Do you have any leaders that are mentors of yours?
Yeah, I do. I've had a couple leaders who took an interest in me, and helped me throughout my career. And sometimes just listening to me, letting me call and say, hey, boss, this is what's going on. What do you think? Just letting me vent, or ask their opinion on something. I had a boss, a mentor, who every time I get a new assignment, because every couple of years in the Army as an officer, you get a new assignment. So your assignments officer calls you and say, okay, Oak, here's what's available. And I'd call my mentor and I say, hey, boss, this is what they're offering me. And every time I called him, he'd say one of two things. He'd either say, Oak, great job, take it. Or he'd say, Oak, run very fast. You don't want that job. And it was just nice to have that ability to talk to somebody who's been there, who's done it, and had some experience, to bounce some ideas off of and bounce some things off of.
Sure. Yeah.
And I always tell people, look, if now it's your job as a leader, it's your job to be the mentor for somebody, because leaders produce leaders. Leaders don't produce followers. And I always tell people, look, if you tell me you're a leader and I ask you who you're mentoring and you tell me nobody, you're not a leader, you're a boss. Leaders mentor people. I got it. You can't mentor everybody. You don't have time. But you got to find those one or two people that you think has the ability to take your place someday, because that's your job, is to develop that next generation of leaders. And if you're not mentoring people, then shame on you.
That's good advice. Oak, I wanted to ask you a question. How do you go from a one-man show of a company to building a team that you can depend on?
Yeah, I think that is one of the biggest things. Team building is one of the most important things. Now, sometimes you don't get that option. In the Army, very seldom do you get the opportunity to build your own team. People get assigned to you. I always tell people, if that's your case, then you got to concentrate. The building your team part of it isn't figuring out who you're going to have on your team. It's training those people once you get them and building the culture that they're going to live in and work in. That's your job as the leader, to build your team. If you're lucky enough, and when I took over as the associate director of the food bank, one of the things that I told the director was, yeah, I'll be the associate director under one condition, that I get to build, I get hiring and firing rights for the food bank. I want to build my team the way I want to build it.
Right.
And he let me have that. And that was great. And I think we got rid of, a handful of people that needed to be gotten rid of, or self-selected that they weren't going to work there anymore. And I got to hire about 5 or 6 people who I think changed the face of the food bank, changed the culture of the food bank a little bit. And so I think that's the key. You really, first you got to figure out what your culture is, because that's going to determine who you want. And I always tell people, when you're building a team, don't worry about talent. You can teach people stuff all the time.
Right.
You want to hire and build your team based on attitude. People that have the same attitude you are, that you have the same, that you can easily get to understand what the culture of your organization you want. And then you can give them the plan and the vision that you want them to do. And I always tell people, those are the 2 most important things, in my opinion, that a leader does: builds the culture and comes up with a vision and the plan, followed closely by building the team. But, and I always explain it this way: the plan is the road map of how you want to get to where it is that you want, your vision, right? And the vision is kind of the goal of where you want, what you want your company to be, to do at a certain point. And the culture is what you want your company to be during that road march, during that drive from here to there. And it's so important. It really is. And that drives so many things. And it should drive the building of your team. What you want your culture to be should drive who it is that you're building your team with. And I tell people who ask me all the time, I always tell them, look, this is one of the most important things you're going to do, building your team. Take your time and get it right. Even if it takes you a little bit longer than you want it to fill out your ranks and do the things, be able to do everything you want to do, you want to make sure you get it right, or at least as right as you can get it.
Yes. But what situation would you rather have? Would you rather build a team from scratch, or would you rather build your team from a group that's already composed?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question. And I think both of them have an advantage. I think building it from scratch is hard. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, you got to go find the right people and you got to build that culture from scratch. At least if you take over a team, and especially if it's like the Army teams, that's pretty simple, because the culture is already built. And now you may want to enhance a few things in your team that you want to really develop, but the culture is there. So building the culture is the hard part, in my opinion, of building a team from scratch. And then you just got to go out there and find the talent. And in today's world, it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it's not. But I think if I was if I had the choice, for me, I would like to build one from scratch, because I think at that point then it's on you. You did it. If it's successful, then you did a good job of putting that team together and developing them, not only the culture, but then training them. Because that's the other piece of it is you can do all the other stuff right, but if you don't train them correctly, then how can you if you don't train them to do the things you're going to ask them to do, then how can you hold them accountable when they don't accomplish what it is you ask them to do?
That's true. It's impossible.
You're the leader, so you need to make sure that they are able to do the things that you're asking them to do. And that takes time, money, effort, just like building a culture. It takes time, money, effort, training, all those things. And I had a young man, I say a young man, 30 years old, half my age, but yeah, a young man. He had just started a company, and he was talking to me. I was giving a presentation, and I was talking about culture and how it takes time, effort, money, a lot of effort to build one. And he said, "No, you're wrong, Colonel McCulloch." And I said, "What do you mean I'm wrong?" And he said, "All I got to do is hire the right people. I don't have to invest anything else in them." I said, "Good luck with that, young man. Tell me how that works out for you."
Right.
You'll get a culture. It ain't the one you want, but you'll get a culture.
Yeah, well, I guess he was expecting to have a situation where he had a revolving door.
which is the problem, part of the problem, and that's why I say it is a never ending thing, developing and maintaining your culture, because as soon as you get it right where you think it's right, somebody leaves and you got to hire somebody else. Now you got to bring them on board and teach them what the culture is and get them up to speed with what it is that you expect from them, and train them to the standards you want them trained. So it's a never ending circle. And so you just got to understand that it's never going to be perfect.
What are some of the best qualities that you think a leader should embody?
Yeah, absolutely. Integrity. I mean, you got to have integrity to be a leader, because I always tell people leaders do the right thing. They do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because anybody's going to watch or anybody's going to check. They are watching and they will check, I promise you. But that's not why you do the right thing. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do for your people and the organization, even if it isn't in your best interest. And there will be times when the right thing is not in your interest, but it might be in the best interest of the organization or the people in your organization. And you got to do the right thing. If they ever catch you not doing the right thing, you are done. Believe me.
Yeah.
The trust is gone. And trust is so important for a leader. The relationship between a leader and those who are led, if the trust is gone, there is no relationship. It's that simple. So integrity, I think, is number one. And number two is communication. As a leader, you must be able to communicate. If you can't stand up in front of people and explain to them what it is you want in a clear, concise, succinct manner, then you can't be a leader. How many here, I mean, I know I've done it, ask your people for something, and 3 weeks later, when they bring you the product, you gave them all the time and resources and everything that they were going to need. They come back and they say, "Hey, boss, here's what you asked for." And you look at it and you say, "No, that's not what I asked for." And they say, "Yeah, it is." And you know what? You look back on it, and guess what? That is exactly what you asked for. It's not what you wanted.
Right.
It is exactly what you asked for, because you did not do a good job of communicating what it is that you actually wanted. We're all guilty of that. I don't care if you've ever been a leader, you've done that. And we got to get better at that. We got to get better at being able to tell people exactly what it is we want in a way that they can understand it. Because that old adage, if it can be misunderstood, it will be, is absolutely true.
Right. Well, how can you avoid that mistake?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways. And I would assume that everybody who's listening to us today knows who Napoleon is. And Napoleon was probably the greatest general this world has ever produced. We still do things in the American Army today that Napoleon developed. So when he had this thing that is called the Napoleon's Corporal. And so when he was out on the battlefield, he'd be directing the battle from his big white stallion, and he'd issue out orders to his generals. But before he would issue out orders to his generals, he had a corporal, a low-ranking soldier that would stand right next to him. And he would say, when he was going to issue out an order, he'd read it to the corporal and he'd say, "Okay, young man, what did I just tell you to do in your own words?" And if the corporal could tell him, good order, can't be misunderstood, send it out. If the corporal couldn't, then he said, "Well, if you don't understand it, then there is the ability that it will be misunderstood." So he'd start over. We all, if you're a leader, we all need that Napoleon's corporal, and it cannot be somebody who is a yes man. It's got to be somebody who is not afraid to hurt your feelings. I've been lucky throughout my life. My Napoleon's corporal has always been my wife. Believe me, she has no problems hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
I'd come home and I'd say, "You know what I'm going to do tomorrow, hon?" And she'd look at me and say, "What? You can't do that." She prevented me from doing some pretty dumb things throughout my life. And we all got to have that person. I don't care who it is, whether it's your wife or your husband or a good friend or your second in command of your company or whatever it is. You got to have somebody that you can bounce an idea off of, because otherwise you're going to do dumb things. I promise you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to what you're saying, and that's why I'm laughing, because my wife is exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely. People ask me all the time. I've given my presentation to some pretty big crowds, and I don't have any problem standing up in front of people and talking. And people say, "Do you ever get nervous?" I said, "Only if my wife is in the audience."
Okay, so do you recommend that leaders take like a public speaking class before they take the job as a leader?
So I think if you haven't been in positions that kind of develop you into a speaker, then I would encourage that. And there's a lot of them out there that you can do. The Toastmasters. I have a lot of people that I've mentored who went through the Toastmaster type thing. Some people just they've just been lucky enough to been in a position, not as the leader, but in a position where they were able to stand up in front of people and talk. And I was kind of that way too. I had some positions in high school and in college where I was kind of asked to stand up and explain something or talk through something. And then I was on a speech team in college, where I had to memorize a speech and get up and compete and talk in front of judges and other people in the room, and that helped me a lot. It really did. I learned a lot during that year-long process, and I would encourage anybody who wants to be a leader, who needs some help with the communication piece, to go one of those routes, either something that allows you to stand up in front of people and talk, and in different ways. So, sometimes you're going to use a presentation. Sometimes you're going to use a script. Sometimes you're just going to stand up in front of people and talk, just like we're doing now. So you got to be able to do all those kinds of things.
Okay. It's been a great show. Thank you so much for being on. I know that everybody that's listening to this show is going to get a tremendous amount of value out of what you said about leadership. And do you have any last words, a word of advice that you would give a young man or a young woman that has the aspiration of becoming a leader?
Yeah. So what I tell everybody who's a young leader, I say, this is advice I give everybody. The trust and the relationship between you and the people who work for you is so important. Now, it's got to stay boss, worker. You can't cross that line, but it can be very close. And the way you do that and the way you build that trust is, I tell people every day, when you're the leader, every day go out and find out one new thing about one person in your organization. Go talk to them, not about work, about their home life. Talk about their husband, their wife, their children, their hobbies, their likes, their dislikes, where they've been on vacation, places they've seen, countries they've been in. Find out one new thing every day about somebody in your organization. And you will start seeing that trust build. And once that trust is there, people will do anything you ask them to do. And I had a boss one time who said, "Oak, the best way to do that, one of the best ways to do that, is never, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee." He says, "I don't care how high you get in an organization, go get your own cup of coffee." He says, two things happen when you do that. Number one, people see that you're not high and above them enough that you can't go get your own cup of coffee. And number two, on your way to the coffee machine, you get to stop and talk to people along the way. And you get to ask questions that I just talked about. And if you're lucky, there's a different way to go back to your office, and you walk the other way back so you can talk to different people on your way back.
Oh, that's awesome, Oak. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That not me. That came from a boss of mine. I didn't know that, but I use it. Absolutely.
So how can people find you on social media, your website, and how can people find your book?
Yeah. So my book is available on Amazon. And like I said, it's hardcover, paperback, ebook, and now audiobook, all on Amazon. You can come to my website, www.ltcoakmcculloch.com, and there's a place that you can go on there and order the book. It'll take you to the Amazon site, or you can hit my email address or phone number and give me a call, send me an email if you want a signed copy, and we'll figure out the best way to make that happen. And I've done that for about 200 and something people out of the 1,700 and something books that have been sold so far. Would love to do that for you if that's what you want to do. And I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. So I'm on all those Rumble, Parlor, all those Twitter, all those social media sites. So just type in my name, you'll find me.
Great.
Not too many Oak McCullochs out there.
That's true. Okay, thank you so much, Oak.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Jason. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you for watching Victory Circle Podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel.